Well, Professor Helmke, we just want to thank you for allowing us to interview. Question number 1. How do you define gun control? Do you define gun control as regulations or bans?
When I talk about gun control, I'm not talking about gun bans. In fact, the phrase gun control is one that a lot of people on my side of the issue don't even like. For a number of years, they always said you need to talk about gun safety or gun violence prevention or illegal guns, those sorts of phrases that, is one of these things that people may have tested the issue or tested the word someplace and found out that people don't like the word control, so stay away from it. I always thought that was a little ridiculous. When I ran the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence for 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, every time I'd do an interview on national TV or wherever, it would always, or to a newspaper, the tag, it would always be gun control advocate, or Helmke calls for gun control. So even when you use phrases like gun safety, gun violence prevention, gun control is the shorthand for it, and I think that's appropriate. And I've never thought of this as a gun ban, though. I'm not anti-gun. I do think we should have some restrictions on who gets guns, how guns are sold, how guns are stored, how they're carried, and what kinds of guns are easily available to the general population. Those are the sorts of things that I talk about when I'm talking about the issue.
Question number 2. Taking into account your party affiliation, how did you adopt the idea of gun control, and how much backlash have you received because of your stance?
I first came to the issue when I was mayor of Fort Wayne, and I was elected mayor of Fort Wayne as a Republican back 30 years ago, 1987. Took office January 1 of 1988, and one of the biggest challenges facing my city at the time was crime and violence. We were seeing an uptick in murders. We were seeing gangs and drugs and guns affecting a lot of our community. So I took steps. One of the things the mayor does is you try to promote public safety. So I took steps to add police officers, even raising taxes to get police officers. We took steps to work with neighborhoods in terms of community-oriented policing. We worked with the faith community. We did everything we could to try to fight crime. And one of the things I learned pretty quickly was that it was very easy for dangerous people to get guns, and oftentimes they even had better guns, more serious weapons than our police department did. And so I looked into see what sort of laws were on the books in Indiana or nationally, and I realized that there were very few laws on the books that made it hard for dangerous people to get guns. And one of the things that was being talked about at the time was the Brady Bill. This is named after President Reagan's press secretary, Jim Brady, who was seriously injured in an assassination attempt on President Reagan back in March of 1981. And the Brady Bill basically said that there's a list of prohibited purchasers in the nation. If you're a felon or dangerously mentally ill, you're not supposed to possess a gun. But we relied on the bad guy, in effect, to tell the truth. They said, Helmke, are you a felon? And if I said no, I got to buy a gun. So the Brady Bill basically set up a system where there would be a computer check eventually to find out if the person was on the list of felons or dangerously mentally ill. And it was a way to say, basically, we've got a good law, a list of prohibited purchasers, but there's a loophole in it that people can lie and buy. And so the solution is, because bad guys don't follow the law, let's get a law that the good guys will follow, the gun dealers that are selling to do this. So I promoted the Brady Bill. I got to know Jim and Sarah Brady through that. I promoted the assault weapon ban at the time because my police chief was telling me that we were being outgunned. And I thought those were the right things to do, that those were law and order issues. And again, Jim Brady, a Republican, press secretary for Mr. Republican Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan backed the Brady Bill and the assault weapon ban. George Bush Sr. backed the Brady Bill and the assault weapon ban. This used to be an issue that wasn't so partisan. You used to have people from both parties support a lot of gun control measures, and people from both parties oppose a lot of gun control measures. If anything, there might have been a divide between urban areas and in rural areas. But it was more of a misunderstanding, I think, as to what people were trying to do with gun restrictions. But, mayors of both parties supported this sort of thing. Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York, was one of the big backers. So I never saw it as a partisan issue. I saw it as a law and order issue, and I think that's the way it should be looked at today. Sadly, a lot of people say, Republicans are always going to be against it and Democrats are always going to be for it. We don't have enough people from either party supporting it, and we need more.
Question number 3. Considering the latest mass shootings in the country, from Las Vegas to Sutherland Springs, how do you think we can prevent this sort of gun violence?
It just it just breaks my heart that we continue to see these mass shootings, and we're seeing them with more regularity. And when you mentioned those two shootings, those are two of the 5 worst shootings in modern U.S. history, and they've all occurred basically this fall. And our reaction to that as a country is the same every time. We do nothing. And that's what bothers me the most. It's hard to come up with one perfect answer. There is no one perfect answer for gun violence. Yes, there is always going to be evil. Yes, there is always going to be violence. Yes, bad guys might find a way to get weapons and hurt people. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do something about it. We shouldn't, just because they're going to get the weapon, why should we make it easy for them? And that's what we do. We make it easy for them. And so when I talk about what we can do, I usually talk about let's have background checks on all sales. Right now, federally licensed dealers are required to do a background check, but so-called private sellers can sell from their so-called private collections at gun shows week after week, the same make and model, never doing any background checks at all. That's one way that bad guys get the guns. Let's look at which guns we have restrictions on. We've had restrictions on machine guns, fully automatic weapons, since the 1930s. Those have been successful. You rarely see a machine gun used to rob banks like they did during the Depression era. You rarely see a machine gun used in a mass shooting. They're hard to get. They're not banned, but they're hard to get. When Congress put those restrictions on machine guns in 1934, all we had were machine guns, shotguns, revolvers, hunting rifles. We didn't have the semi-automatic weapons that we have today. Technology has made weapons more lethal, but we haven't changed our laws to reflect that. So one of the things I think we should do is let's look at semi-automatics and figure out, are there more, not necessarily banned like they had with the assault weapon ban, but maybe there should be more restrictions like we have restrictions for machine guns. Maybe the restriction shouldn't be on the gun, maybe it should be on the ammunition magazine. One of the things we found with a number of shootings, it's the bad guy is often stopped when he goes to change the ammunition magazine. The Tucson shooter was tackled after the 31 rounds in his magazine were emptied. The Sandy Hook shooter, 11 kids escaped when he went to change the rounds. So if you can put some of those restrictions on, not necessarily bans, but restrictions on the guns or restrictions on the ammunition magazines, maybe we'd see less mass shootings. Another thing we should look at is just the idea of having some laws on the books that make it harder to traffic in guns. Right now, you can buy an unlimited number of guns. I mean, it is, people were shocked that the Las Vegas shooter had so many different kinds of guns. And some of the news interviews were, how did he buy 30 of these guns? And, didn't that raise any flags? No. It's not illegal to buy these guns. There are no limits on the number of guns you can buy. And it's really hard to even track anything in terms of then marketing those guns to the illegal market. If someone buys 81 of the same make and model of a gun, what do you think they're going to do with it? They're going to sell it out of their trunk to gang members in Chicago or New York. And that's what's happened in the past. People have bought unlimited numbers of guns, sold it in their trunk. And again, they're breaking the law. Actually, they're not breaking the law when they buy them, and they're not breaking the law when they sell them, because it's from their private collection. So if we made it harder for people to traffic in guns, if we gave the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms more power to check on the bad gun dealers, maybe it's only 1% of our gun dealers that kind of wink and nod and let somebody do a straw purchase or get away with something. If we could crack down on them, we would make a difference. Again, I'm not anti-gun. Good guys are going to pass these background checks. Good guys are going to be able to get their hunting rifles or whatever they want for self-protection. But what we do is by saying, any restrictions, the part of the slippery slope to gun confiscation, we make it very easy for bad guys and gangs to get these guns and to wreak mayhem across the country. One bottom line thing that we could do too is look at licensing and registration. People used to oppose it because, then there'll be a list and you'll use that to confiscate. The Supreme Court has made it very clear that you cannot have you can't have complete gun bans. You can't have confiscation on that level. And therefore, why not license and register these things? If someone gets the license, passes the background checks, has the reference checks for it, fine, let them have the guns. And let's register the guns so we know whose gun it is. Right now, when the police stop somebody and there's a gun in the car, the felon can easily say, "Not my gun. It's the guy in the back seat's gun, or the guy on the passenger side's." If that gun were registered to somebody, then you would be able to tie it back into who the shooter is, and you could arrest these people too. So there's a number of steps that can be taken. None of them are going to be foolproof, but again, strengthen the background check system. Have it for all sales, get the records in that are missing. That was the problem with this recent shooting in Texas. The person was a prohibited purchaser. The Navy never sent that information in. I think it was the Navy or the Air Force. I mean, the military branch didn't send the information in. I read today that the person had even escaped from a mental institution, and that didn't get reported. Our background check system only works if law enforcement agencies send the information in. Virginia Tech shooter was a prohibited purchaser. Virginia never sent that information in. So strengthen the background check system. Do things to stop gun trafficking. Look at which weapons are easily available. Look at perhaps some new restrictions for semi-automatics. I think that look at licensing and registration. Then you would see a decrease in gun violence. Other countries have figured it out. Other countries have the same levels of mental illness, the same video games, the same number of rapes and assaults and robberies. But other countries don't have the level of gun violence we have because they don't have that easy access to guns. That's where we go wrong.
In the state of Indiana, some lawmakers in the State House are proposing bills and amendments that make it easier to purchase such weapons. Do you believe that these moves by the Republican-dominated General Assembly is dangerous?
I think that what we have learned by looking at cities and counties and states in the U.S., what we have learned by looking at other countries, is that the more guns there are in a community, the more gun violence there is. And some people think that the answer to gun violence is let's get more guns out there. But what happens when you have more guns is you have more gun violence. For example, if you have a gun in your home, some studies have shown that it's 21 times more likely to be used against you or a family member than to protect you from the bad guy. That's because of increased risk of suicide, increased risk of accidental shooting, increased risk that the neighbor kid's going to come over and use it to cause harm, or increased risk that you're going to wake up at 3 in the morning and think it's a burglar when it's your brother-in-law. Gun in the home does not make you safer. Gun in the home means your home is more likely to be targeted by the bad guy, because one of the things they want to get when they go into a home is they want to steal small electronics, jewelry, and guns, because those are easy to fence. So a gun in the home becomes a target for you. People that have guns in their cars, that's one of the things that people break into cars for. People that carry guns. Someone who carries a gun is 4 times more likely to get shot than a person who doesn't carry a gun. Now, that's not always causation, obviously. If you carry a gun, you're probably in a more dangerous business or in a dangerous neighborhood or hanging out with a dangerous crowd. But more guns do not make us safer. More guns lead to more gun violence. So steps by the legislature to make it easier to get guns, I think, are wrong. Excuse me.
You're good.
The one thing that the Indiana legislature is considering that really is beyond me is that they're specifically talking about saying that they don't want to have permits anymore to carry concealed loaded weapons in public. Right now that we don't have much of a requirement to get a concealed carry permit, but we do at least require you to go through some sort of a background check, fill out some forms. The legislature now says anybody who wants to should be able to carry loaded guns in public. That to me is ridiculous. And, we've already seen situations. There was a shooting recently north of Denver at a Walmart. And one of the things that happened is the police had a hard time in looking at the videotape, figuring out who the bad guy was, because so many people in the store pulled their own guns. They didn't use them to shoot the bad guy. They just pulled their guns, in case they came after him, which is understandable. But, what happened is that made it harder for them to figure out who the bad guy was. A lot of times when we see guns pulled, you see people shooting the wrong person. The Tucson shooting, where Gabby Giffords was shot, the killer was stopped when he went to change the magazine. He was tackled by people that were there and didn't have guns. A good guy with the gun was around the corner, came there, saw people were wrestling on the ground for the gun, and he was asked, what would you, and he figured that the situation was under control. He was asked what he would have done if he thought the situation wasn't under control. And he said, well, I would have shot the guy with the gun. Catch is, at that stage, the guy with the gun was the good guy who would take it from the bad guy. So you don't always know. As a mayor, when I was a mayor, I learned that when police officers shoot, they only hit their target 20% of the time in a shootout situation. It's not easy. And these are people that are trained, both in marksmanship as well as in when they shoot, don't shoot, their psychological testing. If a police officer is missing 80% of the time, what is some guy with a concealed carry, who just gets concealed carry and doesn't even have a permit to carry it, what's he going to be doing in a shootout situation? Those are the concerns I have.
Question 5. How do you think we can adopt this type of action while at the same time protecting the constitutional rights of Americans? Do you believe that it all comes down to how the Constitution is read?
The people, elected officials, and I'm a former elected official, and I know elected officials well, use the Second Amendment as an excuse to do nothing. The problem is not the Second Amendment. In 2008, in the Supreme Court case of D.C. versus Heller, the Supreme Court, for the first time ever, said that the first half of the Second Amendment was irrelevant. They didn't really care about the words about a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Again, I always say it's the only amendment with the word regulated. And they said you can ignore that. That's a prefatory clause. And they said that for the first time, and this is in 2008, for the first time ever, the court said that there was an individual right to keep and bear arms, provided by the Second Amendment. Previous Supreme Court cases had not said that. So that was the first time they did it, and I think they got the history wrong, personally. I was there, I heard the arguments, I've read the briefs. I think they got the history wrong. But even with getting the history wrong, that decision is not stopping legislatures or Congress from passing the sorts of things I talk about. Justice Scalia authored the opinion, the late Justice Scalia. Not a flaming liberal by any means. And Justice Scalia said this right, meaning Second Amendment rights, this right, like other rights, is not unlimited. We have limits on our First Amendment rights. You can't yell fire falsely in the crowded theater. You can't libel or slander somebody. You can't have obscenity in public. We have restrictions on your Fourth Amendment rights. There are times when you can search and go after somebody and get their papers and get their person. We have restrictions on other rights. So Scalia said this right, like other rights, is not unlimited. And then he went on to say that you can have restrictions on who buys guns. You can have restrictions on how guns are sold, how guns are carried, how guns are stored, and what kind of guns are available to the public. That's what Scalia said. He said that the restrictions that he was referencing were presumptively lawful. Now, you have to fight out the specifics, but since the Heller case and then the McDonald versus Chicago case in 2010 that made it applicable to cities and states, since then I think there's only one case I know of where, one or two cases that I know of, where gun control laws have been struck down by the courts as violating the Second Amendment. Restrictions on assault weapons, restrictions on who gets to carry them in public, all those sorts of things have been upheld by the courts as constitutional. So it's not a Second Amendment issue. And any politician who answers me when I ask them, how about background checks, and says, I support the Second Amendment, that's a dodge. That they're trying to avoid it. When I was in politics, I used to say, hey, I support the Second Amendment too. I do. The issue is not whether you support the Second Amendment or not, it's what it means. And that's what we've argued about in the courts, and the courts have been pretty clear that it means you can't have a complete ban like D.C. did or Chicago did in terms of weapons, but that all these other restrictions that I've talked about are presumptively lawful.
Question 6. When all things are boiled down, do you think that it's feasible to enforce these gun control measures? Take marijuana, for instance. Most, if not all, aspects of it are illegal by federal law, yet people still find ways to grow and purchase it. Could the enforcement of gun control measures end up the same as those dealing with marijuana?
People break laws all the time. No law is enforced perfectly. Whether it's our tax laws, our drug laws, our gun laws, our speeding laws, people break the laws. One of the issues we've got to talk about is why do we pass laws in the first place? Okay, one of the reasons you pass laws is to try to prevent someone from doing the prohibited thing. Prohibit them from using the drugs or selling the drugs. So you prevent them from getting the gun and using it illegally. One of the purposes of passing a law is to prevent something from happening. Bad things still happen. People still break the law. A second reason you have the law, though, is to then arrest them when they do that. So even when people are violating gun laws, even when bad guys have guns that they're not supposed to, that gives police and the prosecutors something else to arrest them for. If you didn't have that gun law on the books, then you wouldn't be able to arrest them for violating that gun law. A lot of bad guys, just read the papers. When they're arrested into some situation, oftentimes it's that they've got a weapon illegally too. That gives us another tool to use to put the bad guy away. Even if it gets plea bargained out, at least that's something, presumably the prosecutor got something in exchange for dropping that gun charge. And a lot of prosecutors are realizing now that they shouldn't be pleading away these gun charges so easily. So, one purpose of a law is to prevent something from happening. Another purpose of the law is to assess that penalty against them after they're caught. Same with drug laws. Third purpose of the law is to send a message on the part of society on what sort of behavior we expect from people. Most people don't follow the law just because they think a police officer is looking over their shoulder. They follow the law because they believe in our rule of law, our system of government, and that you're supposed to follow the rules. Why do you stop at a stop sign in the middle of the night when there's no traffic around, or stop at a red light? You do it because you realize these are written for a reason. Why do people pay their taxes? The odds of someone getting audited are, especially with minimal income, or 1% max or something, 2% perhaps. People do it because they know these are the rules, and they might cheat a little or they might make mistakes, but basically people follow the rules because we have said there's the rules. So when you pass a law on gun violence, on gun restrictions, we're saying this is what we as a society expect. So that's the first thing. What do we expect out of our laws? It's not just preventing something; it's sending the message, and it's using something as a tool when they make a mistake or they get caught. But the other argument I make is that why should we make it easy for them? Maybe the bad guy's going to get the gun, but right now, all they have to do is to go to a gun show and go to the table where there's no background check, and they can get that gun without a background check. We make that easy for them. We don't have gun storage laws in many places in the country, so they know when they break into a house or break into a car that gun's not going to be locked up. We don't require guns to have trigger locks on them. We don't require biometrics on guns now. So we have made it easy for the bad guy to get these guns. And after this Texas shooting, one of the most ridiculous things, one of the many ridiculous things I heard was that, it's a good thing we don't have gun control, or the good guys couldn't have taken a shot at the person afterwards, and he would have killed hundreds more. And I'm not quite sure, how that would have happened, but, the good guys would have been able to get their guns still. Going through a background check does not stop the good guy. Going through a background check can slow the bad guy. Since we've had the Brady bill, there have been like 2.5 million people who have been stopped from buying guns because of the Brady bill. That meant they were presumptively on the prohibited purchaser list for some reason. A lot of bad guys, the bad guy, both in Vegas and in Sulphur Springs, bought these from gun stores. If we'd had stronger requirements to get the information into the gun store for the Texas shooter, if we'd had maybe some sort of, maybe you got to give a reference check when somebody buys a gun. It's harder to get a job at McDonald's than it is to buy a gun. It's harder to get a lot of cold medicine at the pharmacy than it is to get a gun. Here they fingerprint and photograph and signature, and they're checking you out. We don't do that with guns. Doesn't make sense. So make it harder for the bad guy to get it. Yes, there will still be evil. Yes, there will still be violence. Yes, bad things will still happen. But if the laws are written well, they're going to make it harder for the bad guys to get it, and good guys will still be able to do what they need to do. That's the bottom line here. And this is the one area where, for some reason, we give up before we even talk. When there's a incident of terrorism, like we had recently in New York City, people don't. The response isn't, well, we can't do anything about terrorism. Evil exists in the world. Terrorists, if we stop the planes, they'll get the trucks. If we stop the trucks, they'll get a bomb. If we stop the bomb, they'll get a gun. Therefore, let's do nothing about terrorists. If a politician said, let's not worry about terrorists because evil exists and they'll always find a way to do something, which they probably can, people would say, why are you in office? Why aren't you trying harder? But with gun violence that kills a lot more people in this country than terrorism ever has, we just say, evil exists and we can't do anything about it. Let's try. Other countries have tried. Other countries have been successful. And maybe what worked in Australia or what worked in Scotland isn't going to work here, but we don't even discuss it. We don't even take votes on it. It makes no sense to me.
What final thoughts do you have over the topic of gun control?
I would hope that this is an issue where people would listen and discuss. It really is an issue when I try to look at it as neutrally as possible, that we should be able to find common ground. There are some hot button issues in our society, abortion's one, some other ones where, if you believe life begins at conception, it's hard to find an area to compromise. Or if someone's trying to say abortion at any stage, up to birth is okay, it's hard to find compromise. On guns, Justice Scalia basically outlined where we should try to find compromise. How should we define the people that should be prohibited purchasers? We all agree that felons probably shouldn't be able to get guns. Maybe we should add violent misdemeanors to that. Maybe we should add animal abusers to that. Find agreement on who should get guns, who shouldn't be able to get guns. Then once we've got that, how do we find out if they fit that category or not? How do we get that information into the background check system? What's the best way to do it? Should we say that if we can't prove it one way or the other, they automatically get the gun? Maybe we should say if we can't prove it one way or another, they automatically don't get the gun. Or maybe we make that a longer period of time, so there's a chance to check out if the charge has been dismissed or if the name is wrong for somebody. Those are things that we should be able to agree on. Let's look at weapons. Everyone pretty much agrees that there should be restrictions on machine guns, fully automatic weapons. Everyone pretty much says you should have less restrictions on a revolver or a hunting rifle. Let's look at those things in the middle, semi-automatic. Maybe we treat them more like machine guns, should we be treating them like the revolver or the machine gun? And if they don't fit neatly into one category or another, let's create a new category for them. That's something we should be able to do. Let's look at where you should be able to carry a weapon. Maybe there are some places you should be able to carry a weapon if you've had certain training. Maybe we should establish some minimum national rules for who should be able to get a concealed carry permit. Right now, some states have a high bar to meet. That makes me at least feel confident that the person carrying the loaded gun in my grocery store knows what they're doing. Other states don't have much of a bar. That worries me. Get that sort of thing figured out. Go through that list. What kinds of guns, who gets the guns, where you carry, how they're sold, how they're stored, how they're carried, and figure where those lines are. We should be able to reach some compromise. When I took over the Brady Campaign, first thing I did is I wrote Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA. Said, I'm new at this job, came to this issue as a Republican mayor in the Midwest, and I said, isn't there something we can reach agreement on? I said, my place, your place, with staff, without staff, public, private, I don't care. Let's talk about it. Never heard back from him. Occasionally I would debate him on TV shows after some of these Supreme Court cases, and I would raise the issue. He'd ignore me. He'd walk away. Even when the host said, Wayne, aren't you willing to talk about things? No, I don't want to talk. We need to get people that are gun owners, that are NRA members, that like their guns, that feel the guns are important to their life, get them to realize that let's find some common ground here. I get a lot of people that I talk to that are gun owners that say, I'm against gun control, but they support having background checks. They know that not everybody should have weapons. Let's figure that's what gun control is. Gun control isn't taking all your guns away. Gun control is making it harder for bad guys to get guns. And I think if we can get the politicians to stop hiding behind the Second Amendment, if we get the politicians to stop being afraid of the NRA giving them a bad grade, which is going to hurt them with voters, if we can get voters who are pro-gun rights to start thinking outside the box they're in, and if we can get gun control advocates to start thinking outside the box they're in, we should be able to find common ground. But until the voters speak up, until the public speaks up, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, which is nothing, and we're going to keep seeing what we've been seeing, which is more and more violence. I mean, the fact that we've had, again, two of the worst mass shootings, two of the 5 worst mass shootings in modern U.S. history occur within the last month and a half, that says something. There's something that we're not doing right. There's something we ought to be doing differently.
And just one final brief question. Do you believe that these events will influence Indiana's youth, and as a matter of fact, America's youth, from elementary school all the way up to college? Do you feel like these events will morph or shape their view of how gun control policy should go?
I'm still optimistic that we will do something. I mean, I still believe in sort of the goodness of the American people and of the voters, and that they'll try to do the right thing and try to solve the problem. On one hand, I sense that younger people are less tied to the gun culture than perhaps folks my age. We didn't have guns around my house, but I had a lot of friends that would go hunting with their dads when they were growing up. Now, a lot of the places where they went hunting are strip malls or suburban developments. Kids have a lot more options. They're playing a lot more games, video games, soccer, well, you name it. So that there's less of a gun culture today. Statistics show that generally there are fewer the number of households with guns in them is decreasing each year. It's now around 30 to 33%. Those households have more guns than they used to. I mean, what happens when we see a shooting or a rumor that there might be gun control is the people that own guns go out and buy more guns. But there are less households having guns, and I think that's going to continue. So I think that once we get to a certain stage, people will say, hey, let's do what makes sense. We don't mind someone having a gun if they know the risks, if they know the responsibilities, they've been trained. But, it's stupid to keep putting the rest of us at risk every time we go to church, go to school, go to the movie theater, go to the outdoor concert to have to worry about this. That's not a way to get along. Again, other countries have figured it out. So if we can start talking to each other, and if folks are going to push for it, that's what we need. I fear sometimes that the reaction to most shootings is people go out and buy more guns, and and I've heard that even since the Las Vegas shooting and in this Texas shooting, it's a lot of people seem to think society's disintegrating. I'm going to need my gun to protect me. Basically what that's saying is that people are giving up on the country. They're giving up on the rule of law. They're giving up on our police departments. They're giving up on our military force. And I don't think folks want to give up on that. I don't think we want a state of anarchy in this country. I don't think that's not the vision I have for the future. So let's do some common sense things. Let's treat this as a public health issue. Let's treat this as a public safety issue. Let's stop treating this as a cultural, this is my definition of manhood and of myself type issue, which is what we've done.
Well, thank you, Professor, for sharing your time interviewing.
Happy to talk about the issue, and hopefully your generation is going to help solve some of these issues then too. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.